That's so great. It's
Yeah.
amazing how there's so many platforms to share conversations on.
Yeah, it really is, and it's been facilitated by a few platforms, and it's great that we can be able to have this communal conversation, as it were.
Yeah, yeah. And uh, even though more people are tending to listen, I'm looking at your beautiful studio and all the new works that I see.
Yeah, so I just finished this piece, and I was going to post it on Instagram. I did like for 5 seconds, and I realized I had another video piece that was still being boosted. You know how you get the boost. So I was doing that for my book, and somehow it doesn't work together. The algorithm kind of gets I don't know, overwhelmed or something. So I'm gonna post that later. But it's called Agape. It's one of the Agape series.
It's lovely.
Thank you, thank you. And
Yeah.
you have been working on more of your books.
I've been working on books, and I'm also working on a new series that it's called On the Horizon.
Oh, nice.
And my
Mm.
concept of it is that the pieces will be hung at different eye sites, eye
Yeah.
lines, so that everybody's experience of it will be inhabiting another's lived experience.
Ooh, I love that. I was just writing a piece for Gordon College, your
Mhm.
college that you went to, and exhibit coming up. And one piece that will be in the small room is we're calling it the listening room. It's called See Beyond, and it's SEA Beyond, but it's also SEE Beyond. And I was hoping that people will sit down and the to look slightly up at the horizon. And the idea is that if we slow down enough, we can see beyond, right? So sounds like your piece is going to be also meditative.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there's so much that artists are thinking about and reflecting on right now, right? And how do we engage, as you wrote in the newsletter, how do we engage with culture as it is and give that glimpse of what could be?
Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. I am newsletter comes out every month. It's free to subscribe. It's a way for a community actually to gather. Some people have been using it as kind of an excuse to get people together for a cup of coffee and then talk about what they're making and kind of aspirations they may have for their community. So we're trying to write in a way that would be useful for that. But my essay reflects on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, and it's this year is the 80th commemorative year for the atomic destruction. And so, in that sobering light, we also see how artists can frame the question of what does it mean to be alive? What does it mean to speak to each other with hope and desire for hope, even if we are struggling to understand our time and we certainly live in uncertain moments where we're not quite sure what's going to happen tomorrow. But at the same time, over the years, right, we look back in pre-Renaissance time, Frangelico painting during the Black Plague, to, so many artists writing in trauma, in uncertainties. Hemingway writing in front lines, or J.D. Salinger coming back from a war, reflecting his trauma and trying to figure out what it means. T.S. Eliot, air warden during the bombings of London. So these are relevant questions for us, I think, to think about and discuss.
Mhm. Another thing, I had a conversation this week with a mathematician who is doing pure math, and they were adamant that there not be a practical application.
Yeah,
They wanted to just do the numbers and see where that led. And I thought about it in relation to art and making, and I was thinking about, can we actually remove the utilitarian purpose from art? And should we
right.
remove the utilitarian impact?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that sounds like my father, the scientist, pure research scientist of the labs, talking about linguistics and acoustics research in the early 70s. And he was very adamant that you have to have pure research in order to have application, productive, fruitful application. But it would take 10 years at least, where one of those ideas will become very practical and, Bell Labs or AT&T will make a lot of money, for these. And that has turned out to be true. Many of those pure research results have been very much productive for all these institutions, and yeah, we have stopped doing that. So we, because we stopped doing that in mid 80s, we are kind of behind in how application research happens. And it seems like creativity is unleashed when there's freedom and there's long-term vision. And even for that reason alone, I think art essentially is that part of our imagination that is kept alive with long-term vision. And so, um, in a way, to ask the question whether art should be non-utilitarian, if I could reframe that, I would say that art essentially is that. That part of art that endures is the part that does not become immediate to transactive marketplace or even ideological. You know, it's not a propaganda.
Mm,
It's something deeper, something that we wrestle with, to enlarge the question rather than give quick answers.
mm. Yeah, I think part of the nuance that I've been wrestling with specifically is beauty utilitarian?
Yeah,
Like, is it we know that we need beauty. We value beauty. So does that then in the Venn diagram of things place it in the utilitarian bucket?
yeah. And there's been plenty of arguments, right, along the lines of evolutionary theories about aesthetics and how beauty became essential. They argue for survival of the fittest mechanism because beauty attracts mates and so forth. But again, I just feel like that's asking the question in reverse order because I feel like if survival of the fittest is the only way that we determine everything, right? That's the presumption that you begin with. And then you try to fit the data into that.
Mm,
Whereas you and I, being artists, we know that there is more mystery to reality than utility or survival.
mm,
And oddly enough, that's the part of us that keeps us alive, when things are dark, when things don't make sense, when things seems to go against every grain of sanity. We tend to draw back on our experience of beauty or even creating beauty at that time to try to in a sense, project a future that is
mm,
not this limited resource zero sum game in front of us. So if you ask the question from, this survival mechanism, then of course you can fit the data and possibly suggest that beauty is necessary, but it makes a really, really flat argument. It
Mm,
just doesn't resonate with us, with our hearts, right? I mean, that may make sense in terms of what we know to be, the mechanism of survival. But when you force that into a conversation about beauty, listening to music in front lines of war, that just doesn't seem to capture the reality with a capital R. And so I'm always fascinated by arguments of any kind. So I read a lot on this subject on utility and how Darwinism had become this sense of justifying survival of the fittest, zero-sum game mechanism, this scarcity mechanism. But I went back and read Darwin, right, or Origin of Species, and he starts out with observing what is in front of him, right? Just as I would be looking at mason bees in front of me here, trying to find a nest. And his curiosity took him to a place where he realized that there was this way of understanding nature and way of understanding how things became what it is. And so he was simply looking at data and following the data. And this a notion of survival of the fittest or limited resource utility view came only later by people responding to his writing, and he himself ended up putting survival of the fittest in his manuscript. There's only one page, one paragraph where that is the case, but nevertheless, it became a central thesis of Darwinism. So I feel like, well, maybe there's something more to this. And I've been really invested in trying to think through it, but mostly from an artist perspective.
mhm, mhm. So I think in light of that, I have to say, where are you noticing beauty?
Yeah, wonderful. Well, I am just in awe of, I think about Van Gogh often. We went to Amsterdam last month and visited for the first time Van Gogh Museum. And we were able to go to the library that's attached to the museum, which allows you to do research, and there's research assistants there to help you. And I wish I could have spent weeks there, but I really been thinking about Van Gogh and then Monet, seeing flowers and being delighted by them and Giverny garden and pond there, and and how we tend to isolate art in museums, and we have this objectivity to them in a sense because they are established canons of art, that we're supposed to admire. But I think we forget that these artists themselves, were not part of that. They were not part of the salon scene. They were not part of any kind of established systems of being able to see their art. And yet, right, they created as if these museums will someday house these. At least there will be an audience to what they were doing. And so I am kind of in awe of thinking about that because I get to every day work in my garden here at Fuji Farm in Princeton, and um, and I'm a terrible gardener, so I just killed several blueberry bushes because I forgot to water them, and but the in that frustration and struggle, there's something very mysterious about how things grow. Like, and and if you don't take care of them, they die, right? So it's kind of this immediate reaction of what happens to your stewardship.
Mm.
And it's kind of upside down because we tend to think of hope as something that we try to grasp, desperately, especially when we are in dark times. But I realize now, after many years of going through things, that it's actually mundane things, washing dishes or making bread or, gardening or touching, weeding, that allows us, with our feet to the ground, we access something very mundane and mysterious.
Mm.
And I think this is what Van Gogh and Monet really understood, Cezanne too, that there
Mhm.
was something about reality that is not this, framework of new ideological kind of this cubist way of dissecting the world. But there was something tangible that is immediate, right in front of us, the mountain in front of us, so sunflowers in front of us. So in Monet's case, he was creating a world which allowed him to be immediate and literally in front of him. And to me, there's something to be learned from that. And I wonder if artists can participate in this, reintegration of
Mm.
bringing Earth, whatever that may be, in front of them. You can live in the city and, be very much grounded in the city life, lives of people, lives of the poor, lives of, reality of broken city. Or you can be, anywhere or slums of Southeast Asia to, dealing with the darkness. It doesn't really matter. It's the attentiveness to what is in front of us.
Mhm. Yeah. Paying attention to the moonrise and the sunrise,
Right,
you know?
right,
Um, and even if you are not able to see the moonrise or the sunrise, to perhaps feel the light shift,
right.
the warmth of it on your skin or the coolness of the night.
Yes.
Um, and saying life continues happening,
Yeah.
like the sun continues to rise and set.
Yeah. Sun also rises, right? And that sense of what is perpetual, and in a sense, ordinary is extraordinary. Um,
Yes.
and we only realize that when we're, our backs are against the wall in the sense of, you know, feeling threatened, feeling very anxious and fearful. But I think art allows us to pause, and if you can pay attention at that moment,
Mm.
there's many things around us that points signifies something more than the reality we kind of create in our heads, like we entrap ourselves. We fall into this trap of thinking, well, this is happening, so therefore this is going to happen to me, or this is, the reality happening in front of me. We visited Anne Frank's house, which is literally her house that she hid. And you walk through the labyrinth of corridors, of staircases, behind walls, behind, this was on top of a factory, but and there's this beautiful church next to her, house. And then and it just made me think a lot about the time that we're going through, and we feel many of us feel very oppressed and in danger of losing whatever it is, our freedoms or identities, whatever it is. And there are plenty of examples in history where these signs have become real, like real death signs. So, and yet it really made me think about what we need to do as artists. As Anne Frank did as a little girl, she kept on writing. She wrote until the end, when she didn't have any paper to write on. And so there's something about that, that is as sobering as that is. I came away, thinking about, did she hear those bells? That will, at the church next to her will ring, and what kind of hope could somebody in that situation cling on to, and and how amazing it is that we get to read her writing today. Those letters were miraculously saved by local people until her father, who survived the concentration camps, got back home, and he was able to retrieve them and publish them, and rest is history. But yeah, so many thoughts there.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you have this show coming up at Gordon.
Hmm.
And so much of it is work that you did years ago
Yeah,
and this new work.
yeah.
And what is it like to be in these long-term artistic relationships?
It's wonderful, Julia, and I'm so grateful for Bruce Herman, who is the founder of the art department at Gordon, and Friendship has allowed to do this collaborative project called Quartets, based on T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, which a poem which both of us clung onto in our darkest days and most challenging days, and because of Bruce was so funny because when they invited me to do the show, I said, oh, well, I want to do it with Bruce to honor his legacy there. And I was asked to, also give a commencement address. So I talked about his painting of my father, right? So I was on this mode, how can I honor Bruce? And as we were discussing the exhibit, he said, Mako, I want to honor you, and how can I do that? And it was not a question I was expecting. So I was like, well, I don't know, but he said, you have done works because of this collaboration that you would never have done apart from this. And I said, well, actually, probably everything I've done has something to do with those quartets paintings that is literally designed to sit in the back. So Bruce's paintings can come in front, right? He's more figurative. He can really set the tone for how people view this exhibit, how people enter into the poem. And so I literally worked on with Lindsay, my assistant, how to do this with very quiet. And then that led to my liturgical paintings at All Saints. Um, that led to so many of my silence and beauty paintings, which you saw at Pasadena, that I painted some of those. And so we decided to exhibit those as well as some of the paintings from Quartet series, just to show students, especially, that first of all, collaboration can birth many things that one single person cannot do. And it is to the benefit of us, our creativity, to serve each other, to intentionally, die to yourself so you can, highlight your brother or sister in that journey. And but when we do that, I find that, you know, it becomes this generative cycle where both parties benefit. and you end up really highlighting something more than one person can do. And and your work stretches beyond yourself.
Mhm.
And you end up doing things after that I can truly say this is my voice, but it's a voice that was, created during the collaboration.
Mhm.
So it triggers certain things in us, right? And so artists are not survival of the fittest, we're the opposite. We're kind of we won't make it, we're not good at surviving. But what I think what we can lead in the world is in generosity, right? To
Mhm.
giving ourselves away and to write when there's no hope, to sing when there's no one listening, and and what would that do? We don't know, but I have found in my journey that those are the precious moments when something opens up,
Mhm.
miraculously in front of you, and you ask me what I find beautiful, but I'm at a point where I not only look for those things, but I am able to reap the fruit of some of the things I've done like 30 years ago. And I can tell you that everything that I did just purely for the other
Mhm.
has come back and blessed me. I
Mhm.
have a track record of this. Like, I just got an email from somebody from Japan, a 14-year-old who I sponsored to come to an IM conference
Mhm.
at a university. And he was like asking me, like, why did you choose me? I'm nobody. Like what? And I just had a sense that this guy is going to someday become influential. And now
Mhm.
he's in his 20s, but he's a major composer and he's a big part of this Tokyo movement of young people who, with faith, is creating something new into that city. And Keiko, my long-term assistant and friend, has just wanted to email me. She said, we forgot about this person, but now he's like a major deal. And I just talked to him, and he said it was that trip that
Mhm.
grew something in me that to this day I carry, that I feel responsible to give away to others. So there it is, right? I'm like, wow, amazing.
And there's so many different ways of giving, right?
Yeah,
There's there's conceptual giving, there's tangible giving, there's momentary, there's lifelong.
right.
And
Absolutely.
those are all beautiful things. And the work of culture care and the work that I Am Culture Care does is supported by so many people that are so generous.
Yes.
And we are so thankful for them and their partnership
Yeah.
over time, right?
Absolutely. And you're exactly right because after I received that email, the first thing I did was to let the donor who gave me that freedom. Imagine that, right? Somebody, a donor who is not an artist, he's a business person. He said, "You can do whatever you want with my funding." And I was like, "Are you sure?" Usually there's like, checklist. And and so that's why it gave me the freedom to take the risk on a 14-year-old coming all the way across from Japan. And I told them, this is what happened to this young man that you supported long, long time ago. We've forgotten about him. And he said, that means a lot to me because, he's going through things that made him
Mhm.
realize that, back then he was at a season where he could be very generous and free with his funding. Today it's a different story for him. But the generosity part doesn't change, right? He's able to do things that maybe he couldn't do back then because he had the freedom. So it reminded him that, generosity cycle can continue to bless. And he told me he's very blessed by the story. And so something about this, Julia, that made me think that, what we're about with I Am Culture Care, now that we have a long track of history of people being involved, people like this who gave generously to fund projects for us, um, that this is creating an ecosystem that is, and an ecosystem works to sustain the whole, right? It's not just to sustain one plant, it's about the cycle. And there are times when a plant dies, like my blueberries. Um, there are times when something is thriving and we find it extremely beautiful. But there are underground, invisible things that are happening, all these creatures, microbes and things that are at work. And so there's a lot of what we do as artists too that is, maybe for a season we get to do a show, like I get to do a show in the fall. But it's also I Am Culture Care is this creating generative ecosystem that we can all find something to contribute, and the key is generosity. I think you just step out and say, well, I'm gonna help this friend of mine, I'm gonna buy my friend's art instead of worrying about my own patronage. Um, Small things like that. And as you know, it could be very little things that we do in faith, and it doesn't have to be grand gesture that everybody notices.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's mentioning your friend's name in the room that they're not in a positive way.
Yes,
That does so much for an artist
it does.
because you never know who's going to hear that name, who's going to make a different connection.
That's right. Tagging some artists that you been influenced by, or and it's especially those in your community that you saw something and you say, wow, I was encouraged by that.
Mhm.
Those small gestures really go a long way.
Yeah. And then you can do traditional, like if you have money, if you have funds,
Yes.
go to iamculturecare.org and you can
Yes,
make a donation.
you could. Thank you. Thank you. You're a good board member. No,
You know,
absolutely.
um,
Very simple. Yeah.
it's really easy. You can set it up for a monthly recurring donation if you're able to do that.
You could,
Um,
and so subscribing to this
the
Substack is
Substack.
literally goes to 100% to our work and encouraging younger artists and trying to build this community. So
Yeah.
that
And but and if that is not at all within your budget, that is fine.
is
Like because it's about the ecosystem, right?
yes,
Even you listening to this conversation is
yes.
supporting the ecosystem.
Yeah, and we just had an artist from Colorado, David Grossman, who contributed an essay for a newsletter. Beautiful works, and he's doing an exhibit in the fall, so we get to advertise that. But things like that really go a long way for us to connect the dots and be encouraged.
Yeah, so good. So much to see on the horizon,
That's right, to see beyond.
see beyond. Good. Good chatting,
Yeah.
Mako.